For Inside Carolina, I'm Taylor Vippolis, and you're listening to this podcast, which is a part of the Inside Carolina Podcast Network. On today's episode, I'm joined by my fellow Carolina football letterman, Mike Ingersoll and E.J. Wilson, to talk about Carolina's loss in the Duke's Mayo Bowl against South Carolina. Before we get started, though, I just wanted to say thank you for being here. Be sure you subscribe to Inside Carolina wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube so you never miss out on any of the content the team at IC puts out. The support doesn't go unnoticed on this end. Speaking of support, we want to support the people that support us. So that's why I've got to mention our friends over at Johnny T-Shirt. When it comes to Carolina apparel, they have everything you could want. The T-shirts, the jerseys, the hats, you name it, they probably will have it. It's great people and great customer service since it's locally owned and operated by alumni. And don't forget, Inside Carolina premium subscribers save 10% off their orders. All right. For the final time this season, it's Mike Ingersoll and E.J. Wilson. Guys, Carolina, they just get humiliated in the bowl game against South Carolina. They lose 38-21 to the Gamecocks in a game that really never felt too close. Mike, what were your biggest takeaways, starting with you?
I mean, we had a month of bowl prep, available to us. I don't know what we did during bowl prep along the offensive line, but it wasn't pick up twists. We haven't done that. I've been screaming about that since Virginia Tech. I mean, we haven't picked up a twist on the O-line since last season. So, I mean, it was just more of the same. And I'm past putting that on the players. I'm saying it now. There comes a point where it's not on the players anymore. So big issues on the offensive line. Couldn't pick up twists. I'll tell you what, we picked up a twist in the run game and British Brooks snapped off a touchdown. We picked up a twist in the run game, and lo and behold, we scored 7 points on a massively long run from who I think is a very good running back. And we made that kid look really good. So the ability to do it is there. I don't know what the disconnect was, but we struggled. I didn't expect to be as utterly dominated on both sides of the ball in what amounts to a rivalry game against one of the worst teams in the SEC in a bowl game, like a game that mattered, because if you lose the game, you got a losing record for both teams. Like, it mattered. And we came out like it didn't matter. My takeaway, I was at the game, and my takeaway when I was walking out of there was that we played better against Texas A&M in the Orange Bowl with essentially a backup skill players for the most part, with the exception of the quarterback, than we did against South Carolina in the Mayonnaise Bowl, with all of those backups now being full-time starters and having an entire season of production under their belt, some of them being very productive. So it was disappointing. I mean, I don't know how else to, I'm sure it's evident in my voice. I mean, it's disappointing, but also it's like, well, it's just kind of more of the same. It's been we've been like aiming for the middle all season long, and that's sort of where we ended up. I mean, it's 6-7. We're slightly below the middle. Average would be a 500 record. We are slightly below average, which is shocking given the talent we had at particularly the quarterback position. It seems like a real waste of a Heisman caliber quarterback going into the season. Seems like a waste of an offensive line with a ton of starting experience and a ton of game experience under their belts across the board in the two deep, not just the starters, but the two deep with a ton of game experience. It seems like a waste of a guy like Josh Downs, who put up an incredible year early on. And then, this game had some production, but for whatever reason was a non-factor. I don't put that on him at all. I don't put it on Sam. He just, for whatever reason was either phased out of the game plan or South Carolina took him away, which we should have never let happen. There are some positives. We'll get into it, but for the most part, this is not the direction that the Mac Brown program was supposed to be going. It seems like, to draw an analogy to Texas, Sam Ehlinger after the Sugar Bowl saying we're back. Did they beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl several years ago?
Might have been Georgia.
It was Georgia. I think it was Georgia. Beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl several years ago. Sam Ehlinger, wins the MVP of that game, announces, hey, Texas is back, and they're clearly not. It was a flash in the pan season during that period. I'm hoping this Orange Bowl wasn't a flash in the pan season and that this was just sort of this season was an anomaly and last season wasn't the anomaly. But the reality is Mac's been here, it's 3 years now. We've gone 7-6 after a 6-6 regular season, which was defying expectations in the first year by a ton. Second year, COVID year, got as high as number 5. I put that in air quotes. But we finished 8-3 and then gave Texas A&M a pretty good run for their money in the bowl game. Finished 8-4. I mean, okay, good year. You'd think we'd build on that now, given all the pieces we had coming back, and we regressed to not just first year, but worse than the first year, to 6-7, not 7-6 after a bowl loss. That isn't the trajectory you want to be on. Mac knows that, the staff knows that, and they'll do what they need to do to correct it in the offseason. I want to make that very clear. This staff is very capable of correcting those issues and making the improvements necessary to be good. I'm just waiting to see, if and when that happens going into next year. But again, there's silver linings to this. We'll talk about that. But overall, I'm as disappointed as everybody else, particularly since I was there and it was a great environment. I mean, the Duke's Mayonnaise Bowl did a great job of putting on a bowl game. I will say, having played in that bowl game, and EJ can talk about this, having played in that bowl game twice, back when it was the Meineke Bowl, I thought the bowl committee did a good job back then. But really, this Mayonnaise Bowl was a top-notch production. I mean, they put on a really good show for the fans. It was fun. It didn't take itself too seriously. I thought it was a great atmosphere. It was a great matchup, and we just came out flat. And I couldn't believe how flat we came out, given the fact that this game really, even though we were 6-6, this game mattered for the season. And it was against an opponent that you're familiar with, number one, that you beat last year, and that's sort of a rivalry game on a neutral field where your fans are going to be engaged because it's a direct midway point between both schools. I was just very surprised at how we came out in that game, and I hope it's not indicative of things to come.
Yeah, I think everybody kind of has that same level of frustration that you just mentioned. If you care about this team and if you care about this program, I don't understand how you can't be frustrated after what you've seen this year. But EJ, what were your biggest takeaways from this game?
I think Mike kind of really summed everything up. I mean, he really summed up the feelings of myself and the feelings, I think, of the Carolina faithful. It's really kind of disappointing to go out there and see that. And I'll even go a step further. And I think this season, what we saw was our program going back in time. And I think the game, the bowl game, was really a culmination of what this season was. And I think everything went wrong. I mean, this is just another game where we put on displays the weaknesses and the discrepancies that we have on both sides of the ball. I mean, we came out and we started out slow. They figured out that we couldn't defend a running quarterback, so they take a guy who hadn't thrown a pass in years and put him back there, and we make him look like he's an
all-American quarterback. EJ, he went 9 for 9. He was a wide receiver and went 9 for 9 for 160 and a touchdown. And then the backup who looked like, the white kid. I don't know who that kid was.
He was a grad assistant coach to start the season.
That's who that kid was. Okay, he's that good story kid. I mean, he didn't look like he's been in a college weight train. I mean, no offense to him, he pplayed a great game, but I mean, he's like the dad bod quarterback that came in after that kid, after the wide receiver. I mean, dude, what do you make of that? Like, I mean, they two players that barely played tore us up.
And that's a bad, and that can always be the excuses of, well, we didn't have any film on these guys or couldn't prepare. But when you have a guy that hasn't thrown a pass, he's basically flawless the whole game. There's a little bit something deeper going on. I mean, we saw the bad angles on full display. We saw the bad tackling on full display. I mean, we gave up big plays. I mean, it's like every time that they were running or passing the ball, they were knocking off 10 to 15 yards. And I mean, it's like you get to a point like, where's the heart? Where's the gall? Where's the kahunas of these guys? Are they going to come out like you have a whole month to prepare for a team that it's a little bit different coaching staff and a little bit different look, but we just saw these guys. And I just really don't understand it. I mean, and I thought with this coaching staff that we wouldn't have to run into these issues, that they would keep the guys motivated and keep the guys from regressing. But I'm not really seeing this. And like I said, I'm with Mike. I mean, at some point we got to stop blaming this on the players and kind of hold the people whose job it is to get them ready to play and get them prepared we got to start looking at these guys. And like we always say, we're not the people that are going to sit up here on this podcast and call for coaches' jobs, because we've had that happen to our own coaches, and we know how dejected it made us feel as players. And at the end of the day, these are men with families and jobs whose livelihood is dependent on it. So I'm not going to sit here and say a coach needs to be gone, but what we do need to do is have a reevaluation on how we're developing our players, how we're approaching our game plan, and how we're approaching being successful in the season overall. Because honestly, I mean, I don't think that the Carolina faithful wants to sit through another season like this year. Not only did we not play well, but the way we lost was very heartbreaking in most games. And like I tell people, the game against NC State, I mean, yeah, I'm not so much upset that we lost. It's the fashion that we lost. I mean, NC State fans are going to be talking about the epic collapse for years. And I feel like this is just another thing that people, South Carolina fans are going to be able to hold over our heads. So it's really leaves a bad taste in your mouth going into the offseason. I mean, just this time last year, we were talking about how well we played against Texas A&M and the good feeling we were going to have going into the offseason. Well, maybe this is going to be the exact opposite, and it's going to light a fire under some guys and really motivate not only our players, but our coaches to really evaluate themselves and see how we can come out and be better next year. But like you said, Mike, I really hope that this season was the anomaly, not last season.
Yeah, and I mean, you're absolutely right, EJ, and everyone needs to be clear on this. Everyone that's listening to this, EJ and Taylor and I mean, we don't call for coaches' jobs. I'm with EJ 10,000% on this. Like, it affects the players. It absolutely affects the players. It does leave you with a dejected feeling when you hear, particularly if it's your coach, if it's your position coach. It makes you think that you aren't prepared and you don't know what to do, and that falls on the player. There's a lot of ownership and accountability from the player's standpoint that comes with that. When you hear that your coach is on the hot seat, or your position coach needs to get fired from the fan base, that makes you question a lot of things that you did, and the validity of some of the stuff that you did, the good stuff. And then, was the bad stuff even worse than you thought it was at the time when you watch it on film review that season? So, we are not doing that, and I will never do that. I will never, but I think EJ is absolutely right. There needs to be a reevaluation period that goes on here in terms of how you develop players. And I think this staff is very well positioned to do that. There's a ton of experience on this staff. Every one of these coaches has coached great players and has developed good players into great players throughout their careers individually. It is possible for this staff to do it. I don't think there needs to be, massive overhauls or changes in that regard. I think it's just the reset button needs to be hit. And they need to come into this offseason with fresh eyes, which they will, and Mac will get them right. But I'm hoping that we see the benefits of that. I think the biggest silver lining, and I mentioned we'd get to it, EJ just touched on it, is you hope that this will light a fire under their butts. This is the inverse of what the Orange Bowl was last year. Orange Bowl being a loss, but it was again, I hate this term, but moral victory. There was a lot of stuff to talk about after that loss. There's a lot of good things to look at, primarily because it was an offense full of backups at the skill position, and we showed a lot of promise. And we showed a lot of ability and gave us a lot of hope for the future. This does not give you that feeling. So there is the hope now that this will, instead of giving you the jolly feel goods in the offseason and lead into, on a road loss at Virginia Tech to start the season the following year, that this will light a fire under this team's butt. And going into next season, it'll be gangbusters. They'll come out ready to roll, and we'll start running through some people. And if they don't, we'll know and I'm not kidding about this, we will know week 1 what we're looking at next season. I usually say it's about week 3, week 4 that you really know what a team is. And that's still true from a production standpoint. You're going to know what that team is, but you're going to know what the mentality of this team is starting week 1. That's going to be evident. So pay attention to that, everybody, going into the next season. The attitude you see on the field, the body language, and the way that the team in the locker room is carrying itself is going to be a reflection of the coaching staff and the ability to get them prepared and to get them improved this offseason. And you're going to see that week 1. So pay very close attention.
Yeah, going to my biggest takeaways. Well, first, I saw a stat that I'm pretty sure said that Carolina is the first team, only the second team in college football history since they've been tracking like spreads and everything, to lose 3 games in the same season as a double-digit outright favorite. And You saw that 3 times this year against Georgia Tech, against Florida State, and then against South Carolina in the bowl game, to where I think a lot of people are surprised what happened in the bowl game against South Carolina. But really, in hindsight, it shouldn't have been that surprising because this is who this team has kind of shown they are all year, where I think a lot of people still have this idea of this team as being a team that could be a top 25 team when this team has tried to show everybody all year that they're not that good of a football team. And I think that was again exposed on Thursday for the bowl game. And when you're looking at these two teams coming in, a lot of times you guys know from bowl games, it's which team wants to be there more.
Yeah.
And South Carolina, they were the team they had COVID going through their program. They had players opting out. Didn't have their starting quarterback. They didn't have their starting running back. They were missing key guys on the defensive side of the ball. Whereas Carolina, you have players who opted out, like guys who were getting transfer, like Bo Corrales and Eugene Asante and Kyler McMichael. But really, those guys weren't impact players for this Carolina team this year, outside of somebody like Kyler McMichael at the second or third corner spot. But you couldn't tell which team was which from the start of this game, where Carolina gets punched in the mouth against South Carolina, where now the past 3 games against FBS opponents, Carolina has lost the first quarter 49-0. And it's like something is wrong with this team where when I was talking with, I did a video with Trey Boston before the bowl game, and I was kind of getting his take on this team. And I think one of the biggest points that he hit on, and it kind of goes into that 49-0 point in the first quarter, is that this North Carolina team, when you watch them play, it's almost like they expect respect to be handed to them because they are North Carolina. They were a team that went to the Orange Bowl last year. They have a quarterback as good as Sam Howell, and it's actually the complete opposite, where it's almost like there's a target on this team's back, and for whatever reason
they don't know it.
They don't know it. Everybody in the building knows that they have a target on their back, except for this North Carolina team. And that's the problem, where this team gets punched in the mouth and they're left scrambling in the second quarter and then the second half, trying to figure out, what went wrong. But when you set yourself as far back as this Carolina team did, you're just digging a hole that you really can't get out of. And we saw that in the South Carolina game.
Taylor, you made a great point. Bowl games are a weird animal. I mean, it really is about who wants to be there, particularly when it's not, a major bowl game like a New Year's Six, like the Orange Bowl last year, or now the college football playoff, what used to be the BCS. If it's not I think in BCS terms, if it's not a BCS bowl game, those other games feel like they don't necessarily matter. But there's always one team. One of the teams in these lower mid-tier bowl games typically look like they really want to be there. It matters to them. And the other team comes out flat. And it's strange to me how that always looks. It's rare that you get, a ton of these, great matchups where we had, think back to the 2008, the West Virginia, the Meineke Bowl down there in Charlotte, West Virginia, North Carolina, Hakeem Nicks behind the back, Pat White, Steve Slayton, that game, those were 2 very evenly matched teams. They both wanted to be there and play. It was a high scoring game and they played really hard. And it came right down to the wire. There are a few of those types of bowl games that are trickled around bowl season every single year, but there are way more bowl games where it's like this. It's just lopsided, where one team definitely wants to be there, one team doesn't. And you really see how bowl preparation stuck with some players, with some teams, and how it just, it was the other team looks like they must have just been going through the motions during bowl prep. I'm not accusing us of that. I'm not accusing us of going through the motions in bowl prep. I wasn't out at practice. I wasn't in the meeting rooms. I don't know what the mentality was. I just know what the end result looked like. And that's all all I can comment on is what I see. That's the product on the field. I can't comment on the process. And I want to be careful about commenting on the process because I don't know what the process looked like. But what I can tell you is I agree with you 100%. And I think EJ will too, that bowl games are just, there's a weird feeling around them. There's such a long, there's every week, you get into a rhythm in the season. It's every week I'm playing a game and then you got a bye week, you come out of the bye, then you got more games. It's very regimented. It's obviously very scheduled. And very structured. And then you get bowl prep. And it's like, if you play a game on December 30th, you're off for a month. It's a whole month you're off and you've got a week, you got workouts in there, but you're not practicing. So it sort of feels like the off season. Then all of a sudden you got to strap your pads back on, you got to go out and you got to practice. That's, to be honest with everybody, it's kind of annoying. Like, because your body got into the rest period, you got into that rest rhythm, and then you had to throw pads on, go back out and practice, get back into it mentally. It's hard to flip that switch back on during bowl practice and during bowl prep, but eventually the good teams, and the teams that win their bowl games, that switch does flip back on during that prep period, during that practice period. And then that will always, as long as you flip that switch early and you keep it on, that will typically translate into success in the bowl game. I don't know if that's what happened here. And again, I can't comment on the process with Carolina because I don't know what that process looked like. I wasn't there for it. But I know the end result. And it looks like that switch either didn't flip early enough, it didn't stay on long enough, but I do know that something didn't translate from the prep period into the game. And you always see that in bowl games. And I don't, but it is shocking, going back to the point I made earlier about how this one mattered. It's shocking to me, not that we lost. There's always, bowl games, again, it's a flip of the coin as far as I'm concerned for most of these matchups. But it's not that we lost, it's how we lost and how flat we looked when we came out. We should have never looked that flat in a game that mattered, in a game that had, significance for this team and for this program moving forward, and to validate a season that was pretty up and down, but, end on a high note. Like, look, okay, listen, we had a rough year, but we ended on it's a winning season. We're still a winning football team. Like, that's like, duh. That should have been like a no-brainer for this program. Okay. Finish the season with 7 wins above 500. All right. It is of significance. Go into the offseason with some momentum, hit the reset button on development in the offseason, and then roll into next season and hopefully, start running through people. That obviously didn't happen here. So it is surprising to me how flat we came out under these particular circumstances, but as a broader, as a broader, more general view of bowl games, this is not uncommon to have such a lopsided matchup, even when you think the teams are pretty evenly matched or should be at least, for whatever reason, particularly in these, lower and middle tier bowl games.
Yeah, I also found the stat that I was referring to before from Brian Ives. He said, since the FBS-FCS split in 1978, only 2 teams have posted a losing record as 10-plus point favorites versus FBS teams. It was the 1991 Houston Cougar team. They went 2-3. And then, of course, the 2021 North Carolina team joins them with some elite company also going 2-3 as 10-point favorites. EJ, without its starting quarterback, like I mentioned, and their starting running back, South Carolina went for a season high 543 total yards. We've mentioned it before this season, where this is the MO of the new Carolina defense, where they're going to give up season highs to teams no matter who's playing. And for context, South Carolina came into this game with an offense that ranked 116th in the country for total offense and 109th in scoring offense. With the game plan that they put out, if your quarterback isn't like a Pittsburgh Kenny Pickett type talent, are we going to see this more where Carolina gets some variant of the Wildcat until they show they could stop it, where they don't have the speed to run with teams sideline to sideline. They can't get off blocks on the outside, and then they also struggle to bring ball carriers down. So do you think this is going to be the new norm going up against this Carolina defense until they show that you can stop it?
You want to know what's funny? Other than that load of depressing stats and facts about our defensive football team, this is who we are. It wasn't just this season where we put this on tape and showed how bad we could be on defense. I mean, this is something, and we kind of reiterated in all our podcasts. This has become a common theme for us over the last couple of years, talking about this team's lack of tackling, the lack of ability to stop a running quarterback. I mean, when you have commentators who haven't watched UNC all season saying that, these guys figured out that UNC couldn't stop a running quarterback, so they're making the game plan change. It's like, if the commentators can see it, people who aren't actively in football every day, why isn't our staff and our players more aware of what's going on with this? I mean, I never would have thought that the team that was this, and I won't call them bad, because I'll never call any people that are going out there working hard to put their best on the field bad, but this is the team Yeah, this is a team that does not, I'll say they're unsuccessful on offense. This is a team by the numbers that has not been successful. They've had 3 different starting quarterbacks all season. Each one of them, I think they said, had been 2-2. Like this is a South Carolina team who really they had some good wins this season, but they weren't barn burners. They weren't necessarily blowing people out of the water. And we did not perform. I mean, we have the quarterback run is just it's something that's going to kill us. And I think with the way college football is set up these days, people are going to put their best athletes in the best position to be successful. And a lot of that is going to be these specialty quarterbacks coming in, running these wildcat packages, or a quarterback that's the least bit mobile who can get out of the pocket. I mean, and you're right. It comes down to us sticking the blocks on the outside, not being disciplined in our attack lanes. But I mean, it's just more of the same. I really can't say that moving forward from this point. I mean, my perception of our defense and our team overall didn't change any from this game. You know how sad that is to say that when you lose a game in this fashion, that your perception of your team didn't change. I mean, you look at kind of the NC State game. I feel like it was a real carryover. It's like these guys got down in the dumps, put their heads down in a hole, and said, "Okay, we're going to wait for next year." And I think this bowl game was just another chance for these guys. And yeah, I know I'm being a little bit harsh right now, but I'm just describing what I saw. Like Mike said, I can't talk about what their prep was, but I can describe what I saw. And what I saw was a team that I feel like they kind of phoned it in. Like you said, there are teams that when you go to bowl games, there's this weird feeling in the beginning, like it's like, okay, it's just like spring ball training camp feel because you haven't had the pads on too long, but it's the middle or end of December. So like you're definitely in this weird mental headspace, but you got to snap out of it. I mean, you're a Division I college athlete. You're playing football at the highest level that you really can collegiately. And you just have to go out there and you have to put it on. You have to put it on the field. You have to put it on tape. I know, especially for the bowl game in 2009, we had some very uninspired practices. But what we did as players, we got together and said, "Hey, we don't want to go down here to Charlotte and embarrass ourselves again, like we did with Pat White." I mean, that guy came out and had on that 2008 bowl game and had a career game against us. I mean, and I still feel like that was a place that we wanted to be. I felt like we came out ready to play. They just did what most teams do in the bowl game and come up with more creative offense and just tendency breakers. The bowl game is all about tendency breakers. So we can't really say that these guys weren't seeing anything on film because most teams are going to try to avoid their tendencies, at least in their first 25 scripted plays. And I think Mike can talk to that a little bit more. Like the first 25 plays, they're not going to be what you've seen from that.
No, it's all kind of stuff you've had as an offense. It's stuff you've had back in the coffers all season long that you haven't broken out because the regular season games matter to me. You're trying to make an ACC championship. You're trying to make a major bowl game. And then once you're in the bowl, it's like, screw it. And you just throw everything out there. And it's all like the weird gadget stuff that you didn't run early in the season. You see that in your first 15 or your first 25, or you see weird personnel groups. I mean, we do that stuff too. A weird personnel group for South Carolina was having a wide receiver at quarterback who threw for 100% completion rate. I mean, that's something, so yeah, I mean, there's weird wrinkles you see in bowl games, even crazy stuff like that, where you have people in positions that you would not expect. Now, South Carolina was forced into that, but they did have this this graduate student backup, or this GA backup who came in and started playing this season. They had him, but instead of starting the game with him, they started with a wide receiver that hadn't thrown a pass in God knows how long. And then he completed every single one of them for a touchdown. And 160 yards, which, fatty Mike offensive lineman wasn't going to go out there and do. So hats off to that kid. And it clearly threw the defense off. So EJ is absolutely correct that, bowl games are another reason why bowl games are weird animals, particularly the middle tier bowl games, where you got nothing to lose. You see weird stuff, on offense and defense. You see weird formations, weird blitz packages, weird personnel groups. I mean, it's just, they can be very weird games.
Yeah. I was watching Shane Beamer pretty closely on the sideline, and just like his like I was on the South Carolina sideline, like where my seats were.
Traitor.
And, well, that's where the press box is. Not to brag.
Toot toot. Toot.
But I was watching Shane Beamer, and it was probably a 70-30 South Carolina North Carolina crowd, and after every play, it seemed like he was just getting the crowd even more fired up and trying to use that crowd to help out his team. And for what I kind of expected going into this game, it looked like South Carolina was the team that that cared more and wanted to be there more. And I know that's tough to say when you don't really know what's going on inside the player's head and inside the locker room. But like you guys have said, when the product on the field is that bad, you start questioning what's going on with this North Carolina team. And I think the other, well, not the another problem. I mean, not the other problem, but another problem for this Carolina team, the disparity between the third and short scenarios for UNC football it's unlike anything I've ever seen this season, where 1 yard,
man.
1 yard for the offense might as well be a country mile, and it's a layup for the opponents to convert. So Mike, when you're looking at that, when Carolina has a 3rd and 1 on offense, I almost never expect them to convert it, where they just look so lost and they're getting pushed in the backfield and the ball carriers are getting hit 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Jason Staples brought up the point that this looks like a soft football team. How do you fix that narrative that this is a soft football team when they are getting pushed around on the offensive and defensive line?
Go under center on offense and run the damn football and get a yard. I mean, you bringing up this question just like triggered me. Like I was screaming this in the stands, holding back every curse word I could think of. Well, you're 3rd and short. I've said this before. You're 3rd and short. You're in short yardage situations. You're in 2nd and short. You're in 4th and short. I don't care what it is. What are you doing in the shotgun? Why are you going to run a play that takes 5 yards to develop before you get back to 0 to then gain 1 yard, and you got to go 6 yards to gain 1 yard? Like, why are you going to do that when you can line up under center, hand the ball off at 2 yards or 3 yards deep, okay? And you've now cut that time in half. You've cut that distance in half. This is analytics stuff that no longer works. This is the proof of analytics doesn't always work in every situation. This is where traditional football knowledge, football scheme, and football understanding will never go away. It is a simple game: blocking, tackling, catching, throwing. That's what football is. It's 4 things. And if you can't do that effectively, you're not going to win a football game. I don't care what the data says. I don't care what the stat lines say. I don't care about any analytics talk about. I don't care about any of that stuff. If you want to set a tone, you line up under center, you hand the ball off, and you blow people off the ball, and you get a yard when you have to get it. And you make sure other teams know, you put it on film, that if we are in a short yardage situation, they're going under center. We know they're going under center. They're going to convert that first down. You put it on film that we're going to convert every single time. Okay. And that starts to carry through in the season and build momentum, and it breaks people's back before the game even starts. When they know they're stuck in that situation, every time it comes up in the game, they're going to lose. The best way to win those situations on offense is line up under center, blow people off the ball, and get the yard you have to get. That's an attitude play. That's situational football. That is knowing what you have to do, knowing they know you know what you have to do, okay? Putting your hand in the dirt and just moving people against their will and getting the yard when you absolutely have to get it. And every once in a while, toss in a wrinkle, okay? Run a play action, boot out, get a big gainer, take a shot, that sort of thing. But you got to be able to line up and get a single yard. And we've been doing this all year. If we were in short yardage situations 100 times this year, just as a random number, okay, let's just say it's 100 yards for percentage purposes, or 100 times for percentage purposes. If we're in that situation, 1 yard or 2 yards to go 100 times, we were in the shotgun 97 times. I think that's I think 3 is a legitimate number. I don't think I saw us go under center more than 3 times. We did it once in this game. We did it 2 other times I can remember this season. Once was after I got on this podcast and screamed about it. I'm not saying I had any impact on it, but clearly they saw the same thing on film that I saw. Okay. The next game, we were in a short yardage situation. We got under center. We converted. But I think it was 3. Maybe it was 4 times this season. Last season, I saw us go under center once or twice. That is a commitment to your offensive scheme and your offensive philosophy. That is a stubborn commitment to your scheme and philosophy and your personnel groupings, okay, that bites you in the ass. You can be a shotgun team. That's fine. You can be a shotgun, a spread philosophy team like we are. That's fine. But when the situation calls for it, you have to deviate from your philosophy. You got to have a center that can snap the ball with a quarterback with his hands up underneath his grundle. You got to be able to get that ball in that quarterback's hands. That quarterback's got to have the footwork and the ball action to be able to turn around, hand that ball off, and that running back's got to be able to take it in his stomach, okay, and get a yard. It's very simple football. You can't be a shotgun team all the time. And on defense, it's pure attitude and film study. And EJ will talk about this. You know what they're going to do in short yardage situations. And if you don't, you can probably figure it out. On the defensive line, it is push. It's pad level and it's push. Again, football is very simple. It's blocking and tackling. It's catching and throwing. It is on the offensive and defensive line, it is pad level and technique, period, end of story. And then when you get into those situations, you sprinkle in a little bit of want to.
Yep.
And a defensive lineman, I tell you what, as an offensive lineman, there is nothing as debilitating as being in a short yardage situation, getting stood up by a defensive lineman, and that guy making the play. And you being the reason, as an offensive lineman, you being the reason that we didn't get the yard or the 2 yards or whatever it was we needed.
Makes you feel better than getting a sack sometimes, man.
I tell you what, man. I mean, it's because what you've done is you've physically dominated another man, and then you've prevented the entire other team from accomplishing what they were going. So you had 2 wins on that. You beat the man in your mano a mano matchup, and then you beat that other team. You were the reason you stopped them. So it's a pure attitude thing. It's a want to thing. It's even when you're tired, sticking with your technique and trusting your technique, and then deploying that technique and imposing your will on somebody else to make the play when you absolutely have to make it. It's the exact same mentality on the offensive side of the ball. So how do we fix it on offense? Go under center and deviate from your offensive philosophy. Just please humor me on this next season. Please, for God's sake, humor me. Let's see if it works. And on defense, it's an attitude thing. And it's trusting your technique even when you're tired. And knowing that they know what you're about to do because you know what they're about to do. And you just being the tougher, stronger, more aggressive human being. And winning that matchup because you have to. And if you're put in a situation where you have to win a matchup and you can't do it, you've got much bigger problems as a team.
EJ, what about you? How do you think you fix a team that looks soft in the trenches and from the defensive side of the ball, where a third and one teams are essentially just walking through the line to convert these first down attempts against Carolina?
The thing about it is becoming tougher on defense. Like Mike said, it's an attitude thing. So it's never a comfortable conversation if a defensive coach has to talk to his guys about not being soft, because like you said, it's like we're playing a very reactionary game. And at the end of the day, it would be very easy for an offense to come out and impose their will on the defense. But you see it so often. I mean, you look at a team like Georgia, I mean, it's more so the defense going out there and imposing their will on those guys. I know that we don't have the type of roster that Georgia has. I mean, nobody in the country has the type of roster that Georgia has on the defensive side of the ball, but we have to get tougher. It comes down to, I think this offseason, you're going to have a lot of strength coaches and people challenging these players. There's not going to be as comfortable as it has been in the past. I don't think you're going to see a lot of these videos coming out, a lot of the great videos we love to see coming out from this off-season program, because I think it's time to shut some of that off and get in with each other. I might can attest to this. I know we talk about Coach Connors a lot, but Coach Connors really was the change in our program. When Coach Davis got there, he empowered Coach Connors. He told him, he said, hey, you're the guy that's going to be spending the most time with these guys. This is what we want from these guys. We want guys that are going to be physically tough, and we want guys that are going to win in the fourth quarter. So if we took that on ourselves, we said, hey, this guy's coached at the highest level ever. This is what he said we need to do to be tough. That's what we need to do. So it's going to be some very hard conversations. There are going to be some one-on-one conversations in the offseason where coaches want to challenge some of these people. But, I mean, honestly, the sad thing about it is it's one of those things you either have or you don't. I mean, that's one of those traits that we're talking about. They say you can't coach size, you can't coach heart, you can't coach will, and you can't coach toughness. So the only way that we do this are challenging the guys that we have now and being more cognizant of these players' character and toughness level and recruitment. We can't just look at what is this guy's stats. If this team's losing, is this guy still playing hard? if he's playing against a team that if he's overmatched, is he giving up, or is he still giving this guy his all and still there until the final whistle blows? So it's going to, like I said, it's going to be a couple of uncomfortable conversations. And honestly, from the way that our transfer portal is looking on the defensive side, I think maybe these coaches have tried to challenge some of these guys, and some of these guys haven't liked what they said. So I think that the transfer portal is going to make this transition even more harder, because, I mean, back in the day, there are guys that you're going to challenge that'll step up and take that and say, okay, I'm going to wear this as a badge of honor that the coach cared about me so much and saw so much in me that he challenged me. Guys are going to be like, oh, well, this guy challenged me. I'm going to go somewhere where coach is going to let me be me and play my style of ball. So hopefully we can start getting the right type of people in there, somebody that's going to bear the torch for our team being a tough physical defense.
Mike, you mentioned this one play earlier that I wanted to go back to, the British Brooks touchdown run.
Yeah.
Where it kind of goes along the same talking point when you're talking about toughness. I don't think anybody could watch British Brooks play and question his toughness, because every time he's out there, we've said it on this podcast, you watch him and you're like, this is the closest thing to Javonte Williams that North Carolina currently has on this roster, with the vision, with the physicality he brings every time he runs the ball. On just his fourth carry of the game, he scores 63 yards out, cuts South Carolina's lead late. I think it was either early in the second quarter or late in the first quarter, and then he gets one carry the rest of the game. How would you begin to explain that for the fans who are like, why isn't this guy playing more? Why didn't he see more action in the Mayo Bowl?
Ty Chandler's last game, and British Brooks has now announced he's coming back. Maybe that had something to do with it.
So we're saving Brooks for next year.
No. It's not that. It's loyalty to Ty and trying to get him as many carries and get him as many NFL looks as possible. Because here's the other thing you got to realize in bowl games is that, and the coaches understand this. This is an audition for scouts. There are scouts in the stands of every bowl game. There are players on the field that have NFL potential in every bowl game. If you're on a winning team, the team is a winning team because it has guys who are talented. And if you have guys who are talented, some of them are talented enough to go pro. And scouts are going to come look at those guys, whether they're fringe guys, whether they're camp body guys, as they think they are, whether they're, high draft picks or potential high draft picks. Scouts are going to come look at everybody they think might have a shot. Coaches know that. So if you have a senior who is done after this, who has worked his butt off and who has been, loyal to the program and has done everything you've asked him to do, you're going to defer in some cases to giving him as many opportunities as humanly possible. I think that might have played into it. If that wasn't what happened, I hope that's what happened. If that wasn't what happened, it goes back to what I said a few minutes ago about stubborn adherence and commitment to your offensive scheme and your offensive philosophy to the detriment of your team. British Brooks doesn't fit the mold of the offense that we want to be running right now. Maybe we want a more athletic, smaller, more scat back type of thing out of the backfield. Maybe that's how we want this offense to look. More of a Mike Leach, Texas Tech, mid-2000s type of maybe that's what we want this to look like. Pat White, Steve Slayton, West Virginia, Rich Rod, West Virginia. Maybe that's what we want this to look like. Maybe we want more Noel Devines and less Javonte Williamses. I don't know. Again, I'm not in those coaches meetings. I'm not with Phil Longo. I'm not with Mac Brown. I'm not with that coaching staff. So I would hope that it was a deference to getting Ty Chandler as many NFL looks and opportunities as humanly possible, letting him get as much film as possible, knowing that British is going to have that opportunity next year. That's the positive look at it. The negative look at it is a complete and total misunderstanding of what you have on the field, the momentum of the game, and what's going on. Yeah. That is the complete and total cynical look. I'm not going to accuse anybody of that because they get paid a lot of money to be better than that. So I have to assume that they are in terms of the coaching staff. I've seen some boneheaded things, which I think were boneheaded because, again, it is a stubborn adherence to your offensive philosophy in situations where it doesn't call for it, where the situation calls for variation. I've seen that over the last 3 years, not just this year. I saw it against Florida State last year when we were quote unquote number 5 going down to Tallahassee. stubborn adherence to an offensive philosophy and a game plan that needs to be abandoned or varied in some capacity. That does happen. And it happens with this staff. But I have to think that the reason why British, got his touch, got his touchdown, got his stat line, and then was essentially phased out of the game completely was because, they wanted Ty in there. Maybe we felt like we had to start throwing the ball more, although we were still running the ball. Maybe we felt like we were in more of a catch-up situation, which we obviously were under the circumstances, and Ty gave us the best chance out of the backfield as a receiver. I don't know. I have to think that it's because they wanted to get him as many looks as possible. But again, I've told you my absolutist cynical view. Although I don't think that's what happened. Then again, it could be what happened. I don't know.
EJ, if you're this coaching staff right now, we talked about earlier how this coaching staff, they have developed players in the past. So they have developed elite players and turned players into NFL players. But if you're this coaching staff, how do you address the development issue that seemingly happening at Carolina? Because when you're looking at this roster where the year 3 just ended for the Mac Brown 2.0 era, and it's hard to count on one hand the players that have looked noticeably better year to year, where I think the best example of that is a player like Tony Grimes, who last year when targeted, his opponent's passing rating was 33.1, to where this year it seemed like a massive step back to 93.4. So quarterbacks were a lot more efficient when targeting Grimes. And I don't want to just single out Tony Grimes because I think this is a problem that Carolina has had across the roster, where the offensive line has regressed. You have players like Des Evans and Justin Olsen playing out there who look like they're struggling. How do you address a program where it seems like players are either taking a step back or not taking any steps at all?
That's a very interesting question. It's something I honestly think about, and I really can't think of a good answer for that, because, like you said, it's getting to a point where we're not just not developing players. Players are taking a step back. I really don't know how that happens without an injury. But still, with an injury, it'd only be a physical step back, not with technique, not with any of those things. So I really don't understand it. I mean, I was really excited about, like we talked about, like Tony Grimes coming into the season, guys like Larry Asante, and some other guys that we kind of really didn't see. I mean, even Samari Fox, we really didn't see that next level jump from him with the type of season that he had last year. And I know he played a little bit more sparingly than he did the previous season, but we really didn't see that next level of talent. I mean, he looked like he could have been an elite guy, but I mean, like not saying that he played badly this year, but it wasn't the type of year that we expected. And I really think that this coaching staff, sometimes it seems like they're paying so much attention on recruiting and getting the next big thing into the program, they forget about what they already have in the cupboard. And these guys were your 3 and 4 star recruits before you started moving on to the new shiny thing. So you have to make sure that these players are good, or it's going to make it harder for when you go out on the road. There's going to be a guy who said, okay, my friend who was a 4-star recruit went to your school, went to play for you. Now he's not getting any playing time. He's not getting any better. He's not getting any NFL looks. Why do I think anything is going to be different if I come to your program? So I think that it's going to be a larger overarching problem, because, I mean, if we as fans and people who sit down and put this and analyze this program under a microscope and a fine-tooth comb, if we're noticing this and really talking about it, there's not going to be long before there's a national story on ESPN or ACC Network or some website talking about the lack of development at the players at UNC, and it's going to start getting out, and that's going to be that's going to be our scarlet letter when we go out to recruit, and we're going to have to not only sell the kids on why they should come to Carolina, but explain to them that they will get developed and that everything that's been happening is an anomaly. But it's hard to do that when you have guys that we really haven't seen kind of taking some of these next steps. I mean, you think about a guy like Sam Howell, as a leader of a player as he is, we're still talking about him holding the ball too long. And this is coming from other people. Like, people are coming to me and it's like, hey, why is Sam holding the ball too long? And yada, yada, yada. I was like, well, that's something that we're talking about every week and trying to figure it out as well, because we're way more successful when that happens. So, I mean, if you think about him not just having that God-given talent and want to, how much is he actually being developed and being prepared to be that type of quarterback on the next level, even for the team while he's there? So, I mean, our coaching staff has started to develop a reputation for getting the guys in the door, but not really doing anything with them once they're there. So I really don't know how we address that. I've never been a coach. I've never had to deal with that. I've never been tasked with recruiting new players in, developing a game plan, and developing players. So it's a tough call, but that's a job that they signed up to do.
Terry Bowden had that problem too. EJ, remember the old Clemson teams?
Yeah. You look at the Clemson teams. I mean, they have one of the top 5 or at least top 8 recruiting classes in the country, and then they come out on the field and they be very, very average. I mean, we played against one of those teams down where they had Philip Merlin, Gaines Adams, James Davis, C.J. Spiller, and you're still not hearing Clemson talking in national promise until the last couple of years, and that's because Dabo came in and started developing some of the guys that were there, recruiting the guys, and then making them better. I think the best example of that is you look at Hunter Renfrow. I mean, this guy had he got progressively better. You look at him now, he's one of the best possession receivers in the NFL. So, that's what happens when you develop players.
And he looks like a dad that drinks garage beers on Saturday morning.
He really does. I mean, that's what makes what he's doing more impressive.
It shocks me every time I watch a Raiders game and just Hunter Renfrow running wide open 13 yards down the field for a nice 17-yard game
with zero muscle tone at all. Yeah.
But his routes are precision.
Oh yeah,
they are. Yep.
Mike, along those same lines, the Carolina fan, they're hanging their hat on the recruiting rankings and that better days are coming for this program because better talent is on the way. But yeah, the counterpoint to that is Carolina isn't losing to the Clemsons and the Georgias and the Alabamas. They are getting thoroughly outworked by Florida State, South Carolina, Georgia Tech, who's been recruiting for the triple option.
Their head coach wears a flat bill hat and a tank top.
The past 10, 15 years, Georgia Tech has been recruiting for the triple option. Jeff Collins comes there, and he's trying to figure out, how do I get away into a more modern style of football? And in year 3, his team destroys North Carolina. So
with him dressed as a baseball manager,
a T-ball coach.
T-ball coach, yeah.
So it can't be as simple as just plugging in better players when the product on the field looks like this in year 3, is it?
No, and this is sacrilege coming from we work for IC, which is, at its core, a recruiting service, and recruiting, reporting service. And so is 247. But the truth of the matter is that none of that stuff has any real impact on the team unless you can, like we've talked about now for 15 minutes, develop those players once they're in the door. Recruiting is nice, and what the rankings do, and fans need to understand this. If you're a 2-star and then you get a string of Division 1A offers or FBS offers, you will then become a 3-star because of those offers. You didn't change as a player. The offers you got from other schools validated your talent, and then you increased in ranking. That then continues throughout the ranking system. The more prestigious teams and programs that offer you, the higher star rankings you get. Next thing you know, you're a 4 or 5-star recruit. But you haven't gotten any better as a player. In most cases, you've just gotten more attention. You've gotten more offers from programs. So the ranking system is all great, and it does serve a purpose. But it doesn't really matter once those guys are on campus. And we've seen that. EJ and I have personal experience with that with guys we played with. Every program in the country has this, where you have 4 and 5-star guys that come in and they just don't make it for whatever reason. The college is just not the type of game. We talked about this off air before the pod started. There's guys that go to college. They were stars in high school. They were All-Americans in high school, and the college game just doesn't suit them. Just like there are guys that go to the NFL, and the college game didn't suit them, but they kill it in the NFL, and they rack up 10-year careers. And in college, they were like okay guys, maybe spot starters. I mean, there's dozens of guys like that in the league right now. And then the inverse is also true. We've got guys that were stars in college. And this is what we talk about with busts. They're the ones that get the most attention. The guys that were great in college, they get to the NFL. and their game just doesn't translate to the NFL game for whatever reason. But what people don't pay attention to are guys that are the opposite, where they weren't that great in college. They were good players on okay teams. And then they get to the league and they're stars. And there's just there's different strokes for different folks is how I equate it. The same is true with recruiting. Guys can be all world in high school and they come to college and they just fizzle out. What made the 2000s Miami teams so great was that they would recruit guys that were 2 and 3 stars out of Florida that were being overlooked because Florida is such a fertile recruiting ground. They would recruit guys that weren't, the highest rated recruit in the state of Florida, but maybe they were playing the wrong position and they could be put somewhere else and they were a more natural player somewhere else at a different spot on the field. Or they were just being overlooked because the guy at the school down the street was, the all-world recruit. This kid was just as good, if not better, or at least had the potential to be better. But because of that kid down the street, he wasn't getting the looks he was supposed to be getting. Miami would take those guys and they would take a 2 and a 3 star guy and they'd turn them into a first-round NFL draft pick. Many of those guys, think Ed Reed, are now Hall of Famers. Okay. That is because of player development. That's what made those 2000s era Miami teams so good, was player development and spotting talent where other folks missed it. Diamonds in the rough type of thing, that old cliche. Recruiting is not a science. You do want as many of the high-ranking recruits as you can get because the advantage of them is obvious. They come on the campus, presumably with more physical talent and physical tools that you can then build on. But if you don't ever build on those tools and the player comes in the door, at this level of play, and then they leave and they never got any better while they were there, then what was the point? And that's the situation that you see a lot of teams run into with some of these 4 and 5 star recruits. So what I would say is fans can get, the recruiting rankings and the signing day and all that stuff, that fans should be excited about that. If you get a lot of guys, what it does show is if you get a lot of high ranking recruits committing to your school, okay, and signing with your school, that's a vote of confidence in your program, a vote of confidence in your coaching staff. Those players, without knowing anything about you or your campus or your culture, say, I want to play for these guys. That should get you excited. You should feel a sense of pride in that. But that's where the excitement and the expectations should stop as fans. Because then what happens is, do they develop? What you then need to pay attention to is, do they develop? And recruiting rankings and the recruiting process has no control over what happens to those guys when they get onto campus, how they develop themselves, how the staff develops them, and what will they ultimately become? Will they fizzle out or will they stay stars? Will they become better than they were? Will they leave better, more talented, more capable football players than when they walked in the door? And if they don't, you never hear from them again. Or your program puts them on the field because of how highly they were ranked, but they don't produce at the level that they are expected to produce. Then they're not developing at the way they're expecting to develop. And now they're no different than the 2 and 3 star guy down the street who winds up at the other school in your conference, who's now beating you. That's my take on recruiting. That's a long way of saying recruiting doesn't mean anything other than high school kids who are being recruited by the other Goliaths of college football have shown a vote of confidence in you and your coaching staff. And that should make you feel good. That should give you some warm and fuzzies. It really should. That is a good litmus test for where the outside world thinks your program is. But once signing day is over, what the outside world thinks doesn't matter. And all that matters is what's actually going on inside that building. And if those players aren't developing and they're not turning into the player you need them to turn into, you're going to continue to shoot for the middle. You're going to continue to be mediocre, no matter how well you recruited the year before, no matter how high that class was ranked. What matters is the guys you have in the building, the guys that are in that weight room that are going through that offseason program. What EJ just talked about, those guys you already have are more important than the shiny new thing you got coming in the door. And the focus should be on those guys you already have.
Yeah, we're celebrating the new year today, but it's feeling a bit like Festivus, the 23rd of December, where we're airing out our grievances with the Carolina program. But that's all we have for this year on this podcast. I just wanted to say, thank you, Mike and EJ, and thank you everybody that listens. I think this podcast was pretty therapeutic today. But I think, it can seem harsh at times, but I think we come from a place of caring about this program. And Not
we love
one,
our program. We love
No.
our program. We
Yeah.
killed ourselves for this program. We did. I've got it up on, you see, if you're watching the video, I got it up on my wall behind me. The proudest thing I am is a Carolina football player.
Yeah.
That's my identity will always be a Carolina football player. The program matters to us. So Taylor's right. If we seem like we're being harsh, it comes from a place of love because our expectations, having been in that building, are at a certain level. Whether that's justified or not is for the fans to debate on the message boards. But we have certain expectations that we want our program to succeed, just like a parent wants their kid to be successful, right? The program is our baby and we want it to be successful. So yeah, we get mad, we get pissed, and we rant on things, and our heads explode when you talk about why can't we convert on 3rd and short, and that's what happens. But it's because we come from a place of love and pride and, frankly, identity. It is Carolina football is our identity.
Yeah, it also comes from a place where I don't want to be the 75-year-old, 80-year-old guy saying,
Yeah.
maybe it's this year for Carolina football. And you just keep moving the goalposts down year by year and getting your hopes up every July and August. But guys, again, thank you for the time. Always appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Thanks, Taylor.